NSFW, how would you feel if, as a young adult, you became aware that your parents had been swingers/open marriage types throughout your whole life? Story 1, fine. My parents were hippies in the 1960s and 1970s. My mother is a lesbian, and my dad was fine with it. They were friends but agreed to have a child and marry to raise me, as this was not something my mom could do on her own. However, they were not romantically tied to each other, just partners and parents. Story 2. I worked with a sound engineer who had this happen to him. He finished school and did some traveling for a couple of years, and when he got back, he discovered that his parents were all about that lifestyle to the point where they had open-door parties at home, and his father was a well-known leather maker in the scene. Whips by George, apparently. The operations manager of the sound and lighting company we both worked for was a regular customer. Story 3. Oh good, trauma resurgence. I found out when I was around 13 years old, pictures and videos saved on the family computer. The worst part was my friend was sitting right next to me and saw it too. What's even worse than that is we had a boat that we took out almost every weekend, and a lot of it happened on that and in the cabin of the boat where I regularly laid down or slept. I, as one does, suppressed it a lot and pretended I didn't know that any time my parents said they were going to meet with some friends from out of town, that meant it was swinging time. Many years later, my parents split, and I decided it was time for my siblings to share in the horror. Do not snoop around, kids. You'll regret it. Story 4. My parents were always very open about sex. They weren't swingers, but I have always been aware, well, since being a teenager, that my parents have a sex life and it is normal and natural and we can all joke about sex in my family. Had they been swingers, they are the types to explain about it, so I do not think I would have had an issue with it. Probably would not go telling my mates, but really, as long as everyone knows and consents, where is the harm in the lifestyle? I think as long as you do not raise children to believe sex is bad, wrong, and shameful, there is not really much of an issue. But do not do it with their mates' parents, that could be a nightmare. Story 5. I would just keep in mind that there are a lot more people on Reddit that would be open to that than in real life. The average Reddit user skews left and more liberal relationship-wise. And of course, people who feel more strongly, typically in agreement in this case, about this than someone who isn't are more likely to reply. Good luck with whatever choice you make out of this situation. Story 6. When I was a kid, my parents were swingers. It destroyed their marriage. I don't have the details nor do I want specifics, but I can say that they definitely cheated on each other in addition to swinging. I think my father had gotten paternity tests during the divorce, but honestly, there is no doubt my sister and I are his kids. We both look just like our parents. It's as obvious as day. Either way, I feel strongly about cheating to this day because of it. I also have a strong aversion to that lifestyle and people in it. I'm not morally opposed or anything, just big yuck vibes to me. No thanks. Both my parents went full monogamous after their divorce, by the way. The swinging life apparently ran its course through them. Story 7. I'd probably pack that away in the old bad thoughts bottle and just take my frustrations out on some poor, innocent soul later. On a serious note, there's no reason for your children to have to be aware of that. Just handle it and be discreet. Story 8. While the lifestyle itself is okay with me as long as it's consensual, my parents also would be the biggest hypocrites on the planet if they did something like that, due to their religious background. Story 9. Impressed that they managed to hide it and beyond surprised because my mom is the archetype of a mom. Very rarely did she act in a way that reminded us she was a whole person apart from being our mother. Story 10. Born in '64. Every weekend, my parents would get together with another couple who were their friends from high school. Me, the firstborn, and my cousin have my father as a father. My brother and sister have the other man as their father. As we got into our 20s, we started to suspect this, but by the time our parents had all died and some confessed, we were all positive of it. Only my sister and her half-sister have any kind of close relationship where they treat each other as family. Story 11. If I had never noticed or known before, I would be grateful they kept it private. I am more thinking if I am finding out now, why or how. If they are being open and just telling me in case I hear anything, I tell them thank you, but nobody wants to hear about their parents having sex, so I appreciate the information and we never need to discuss it again. If they think I am old enough to not be surprised by it and they want to bring their dates and partners around, no thank you. Give me time to process this and ask again in a few months. If they were always safe and happy and did not upset each other, I cannot really be too bothered. Story 12. I feel like my childhood would have been much better. They really didn't like each other, and all of us kids could hear their 4 to 5 times a year, really dull intimacy. I think both would have been less stressed and uptight if they had been more open to change. Story 13. Sometimes it is tough to learn your parents are people too, and have their own lives and interests. For many people, just thinking about their parents having sex is difficult. It is understandable that realizing your parents had all the sex would really be difficult. The real question is whether they were good parents. If so, you did better than many, many kids. If they loved you and didn't abuse you, consider yourself lucky and let them have their private life. It wasn't about you. Story 14. As a young adult, I might not have been equipped to handle it, as youth tends to get angry when its preconceptions of the world are tested, especially when the foundation of your life looks different than you thought and is still responsible for propping up your identity. But that's just the selfishness of being young. As an adult, I'd just be happy that they were happy. It wouldn't change anything. Story 15. I'm proud of them. My parents were Gomez and Morticia Adams, the epitome of a punk goth, loving marriage. They were introverts, so the idea of them being involved with others would be quite amusing. My spouse and I enjoy the occasional addition of a third person in our relationship. If my parents enjoyed that as well, that's wonderful and I'm happy they were satisfied. Story 16. It's all fun and games until little Johnny realizes that he looks more like Uncle Ron or the gardener than his own father. I think being a swinger couple, having a kid, and then if or when the kid finds out, there'd be a good amount of emotional trauma. Story 17. As a young adult, I would be surprised and probably very shaken. I was a pretty innocent kid growing up. College really helped me learn about the wider world, and my parents weren't super strict but definitely had some strong views about right and wrong behavior. So, if I were like 18, freshly home from my first semester at college, and they casually dropped that their neighbors would come over for hanky-panky on the regular, I'd likely wonder if they had been replaced by aliens. I know that's how I'd feel because I had a similar reaction when they started casually mentioning how they used to do drugs. Comments like, "Yeah, we would have done a lot more cocaine, but we had a mortgage to pay." Or my dad saying, "Oh, weed? Yeah, as soon as you kids were asleep every night, I'd smoke up and then use my rowing machine for an hour while jamming out to Fleetwood Mac in the basement. You could bounce a quarter off my abs." Blew my mind when these were the folks who scared me away from even trying alcohol or smoking while I was a kid. As an older adult in his 30s, though, I look back at that now and laugh and go, hell yeah, I get it. The blinders have been off for years. I've long accepted my parents are just regular people, not paragons of virtue or villains of vice. I expect my own kids will be similarly shocked if we tell them what their mom and I got up to. But like my parents, I'll probably wait until they're adults and have moved out. Story 18. As a young adult, it would have rattled me, and I would have asked to make sure my dad was my dad. As a 30-something, if I found out now, I would say, cool, I'm happy you guys had or have fun, and then never bring it up again. Story 19. I remember a very similar thread to this a few years back, and it was a guy whose parents often had a third for extended periods and would sometimes just have people over to stay for a few weeks or months while they essentially engaged nonstop. His main issue wasn't that they were open about sex. It was that he didn't feel secure at home because his house would regularly have strange new people in it, and his parents would insist that he interact with them as if they were uncles or a new parent. They would be angry at him for not immediately accepting that Uncle Jonas just lives with them now and calls them mommy and daddy too for some reason. Some of those people were extremely sketchy, and they would just disappear from their lives all of a sudden, and his parents would just pretend like nothing happened. The main way this impacted him socially was that he absolutely did not want to have friends over, which made things very difficult when he had to keep making excuses. So yeah, it was more that they had absolutely zero consideration for the impact on his life while they explored their own lives. Story 20. I definitely want to get a paternity test to find out if I am indeed my dad's child. And I would want to know if I have any half-brothers or half-sisters out there. And I would probably want to make sure they do not associate much with my kids or my family. I think I would be too creeped out and ashamed to let them be around any of my friends or family. Story 21. So this happened years ago, more years than I'd like to admit, okay? But my parents were going through a really tough time. My mom had hit menopause, and it was literally turning her into a different, scary person. She literally attacked me one time when I came in from the porch and went into the kitchen because she was convinced I'd left dirty footprints on the floor. Turns out it was my dad who'd done that. She was slamming doors, screaming at my sister and me for things completely beyond our control, like a branch fell during the night because of a storm, and it was our fault kind of stuff, and telling my dad she didn't want to be married anymore. Then, when she got on some medicines for the menopause, she suddenly decided she wanted to date other people. I cannot tell you how out of character this was for my mother. She's very monogamous. So, while I don't know all the details, I do think that did occur a couple of times with my dad's blessing. Petered out and nothing really came of it, but my younger sister was pretty freaked out later because my mom was sharing all sorts of inappropriate details. The lesson here is one, if you're a woman or assigned female at birth and suddenly start not feeling like yourself, for the love of God, see your doctor, and two, don't ever try to suddenly incorporate non-monogamy into a 40-year marriage and then think it's okay to tell your kids about it in graphic detail. The irony was very delicious when years later, I finally came out as polyamorous because my wife and I were both in long-term relationships, and we were tired of hiding our partners. The way my mom reacted, I could tell she'd completely blanked out her own menopause adventures, and boy, did I have to gently remind her, which she did not appreciate. Story 22. Child of swinger parents here. I never had a problem with it. When I was younger, I just thought they had a really close, super fun friend group. As I got into my teens, I realized that they were all a little too close and started connecting the dots. When I was an appropriate age, they openly spoke of sexual health, safety, and positivity, which I think are important lessons lots of children miss. I never felt the urge to tell any of my friends about them. My partner figured it out on her own pretty quickly. They're old and retired, so they don't put much effort into hiding it anymore. I'm 40 now, been with my partner 20 years. As it turns out, the apple didn't end up falling far from the tree. Luckily, my parents and I have enough of an age gap we don't run anywhere near the same circles. Story 23. Be disgusted. What two consenting adults without children do isn't a problem, but I'm sorry, once you have kids, that is over. You cannot be involved with numerous people while magically shielding your children from any of the fallout. Your secret will absolutely always get out, and it will always be used by other children to bully your child. If you have to maintain the lifestyle, then reserve it exclusively for holidays with strangers, or take a break and wait until your child has grown up. Anything else is completely irresponsible and selfish, to be honest. Story 24. I would be extremely disappointed in my parents for engaging in that type of degeneracy. I think one of the best things you can do as a parent is to demonstrate what a healthy, monogamous relationship looks like, as it would help me be a better spouse later in life. I didn't have that, as my parents were divorced from a young age, so I had to learn on my own. This is AskReddit, so I'm assuming I'll get downvoted for this because Reddit loves sexual degeneracy, but I don't care. Open marriages and swinger lifestyles just don't work. Why even be married at that point? It's disgusting. Story 25. As long as it's ethical non-monogamy, I would be happy that they enjoy their life. I am pissed off at how they demonized my sex life for decades and request to not hear details beyond being told. This is a very close friend of ours. Story 26. I would not have liked that when I was young, and I would not care today. I would want to confirm my genetic heritage, I think, just in case a really rich person is my real dad. I don't need anything from my hypothetical rich dad, but my 5 kids and sickly wife could use a hand up. Father. Story 27. Honestly, I wouldn't judge them. People like what they like, and as long as everyone is consenting adults, then I don't see the problem. I might actually be happy for them since they seem to have a healthy sex life, which is starting to seem uncommon these days in relationships, especially in the East.